You're so sweet. You're so sweet. Hi. I've been spending loads of time in Christian and Christian adjacent spaces on the internet lately, and because I've been spending so much time around Christians, I thought it was time to make a video about how demons saved my life. Yeah. There's not a script for this video, and this isn't a subject I talk about very often. I've written about it several times because it was incredibly useful. But I don't talk about it because, my prevailing hypothesis is that it's weird brain things. Now, regardless of whether it was spiritual or psychological, I was necessarily talking to myself because you and your demons are the same person, because you are that is all. And that includes demons, of course. So functionally, it doesn't actually make a difference what the theological reality is, but I should stop stalling and just tell my story. The story begins with me in a rather terrible state. I was living with my ex of over a decade, and that was unpleasant. It was a genuinely life-threatening situation, and I won't be going into details about that yet. He told me that I should read this. And he said that because, according to him, I sounded like Curly with the way I talked about the theological implications of human intimacy. I was incredibly offended by this. At the time, I was trying very hard to be Catholic despite struggling to believe, and had been for literally decades. And I had thought that Crowley was a Satanist and generally mad and problematic in a million different ways. You've probably heard some of the stories. But he brought it down and he showed me how short it was, and I said, okay, it's not really fair for me to judge a writer without having read them. I mean, I read Ayn Rand, for goodness sakes. Don't read Ayn Rand. Please, let me take this bullet for you. Okay, but Curly, we were talking about Curly. So I read this book, not this edition. That edition actually got thrown away. So I read this book, and a few minutes after I finished, I had the most rapturous ecstasy of my life. I had been taking a bath, contemplating one of the very last lines, and I just started flailing wildly in the bathtub, dipping beneath the water in absolute ecstasy as tears streamed down my face, and like compounding images and concepts and feelings all burst through my brain. A lot of people call this a download. Other people call it a vision. I think the most secular explanation is that my brain synthesized a great number of symbols and theological implications very, very quickly, and it liked it. It liked it a lot. My response at the time was less sensible. I suddenly very firmly believed in God, which I had never been able to accomplish despite my best intentions previously. And I said out loud, "Oh my God, it's a literal rapture." I'm genuinely sorry for my puns. But that is what happened. One thing is for certain, that was the most intense surge of dopamine that I have ever experienced in my life. And if you're a neurology nerd like I am, you'll be at least somewhat aware of what that means. In my case, it meant that within a few minutes, I was hearing voices. At the time, it seemed perfectly plausible that it was spiritual beings speaking to me, which is not really that shocking under the circumstances. What surprises me more is what they wound up telling me. The first voice introduced himself, and I told him, no, that's ridiculous, I'm just going crazy. And then he responded, after I told him to go ahead and try again, by saying he was my holy guardian angel. This is not a phrase I had heard. I did not read the introduction of the Book of the Law, where it was laid out, actually. I had to go back for that. But that's what he said. My response, however, wasn't quite as charitable as I was right now. He said, "I'm your holy guardian angel." And I said, "Angels don't exist." The voice replied, "Look it up. Look it up in Catholic things, because you consider yourself Catholic for some reason." So I looked it up, and apparently real-life adult human beings believe in holy guardian angels and guardian angels more generally. I was a little bit embarrassed that a voice in my head was more informed about religion than I was when I had been obsessed with it for decades at that point. But he was basically my guide for the whole summoning experience. I didn't realize what was happening at first, but basically after I agreed that yes, okay, he was right, guardian angels are something that real people believe in the modern day, that we could go forward with whatever was going on so that I could figure out what was going on. I could figure out what type of God actually existed, since, much to my surprise, it seemed like one did. I may need to explain my faces. Okay, I'm pretty much a hard agnostic. I am a neurology nerd, I am a psychology nerd, and I am quite aware of all of the ways that brains trick themselves. I look at these experiences as potentially spiritual, but also as potential cases of my brain tricking me. Hallucinations, confirmation bias, even false memories. These are all possibilities, but I am still trying to tell you the story as honestly as I can. So if you believe, awesome. If you don't, also awesome. In fact, I probably empathize with you a little bit more. But I'm going to tell you the story as it happened. The first creature that came about, other than my angel, felt very, very different. There was massive power there, some hostility. I just didn't know what to do with it, and I couldn't make it go away, which was quite frightening, honestly. But I was encouraged to actually talk and listen and see how the encounter went. And as what I knew best to do was asking who the spirit was, because even if I was crazy and I was thinking about that possibility at the time, I might as well go through the standard protocol, right? So I asked who it was. And the presence didn't give me a name, but it did tell me to go to the Bible. And so I pulled out a Bible, not this one. Once again, this is a different copy and even a different translation. And she told me to open it up, and she would tell me when to stop and when to read. And initially, I opened the book to 1 Kings chapter 11, The Sins of Solomon. I ran my hand down the page, waiting for the familiar tingling sensation that I had learned to do while reading tarot cards as a child. And when I thought I had reached the right line, I started reading. And that line said, "When Solomon was old, his wives had turned his heart to strange gods, and his heart was not entirely with the Lord his God, as the heart of his father David had been, by adoring Astarte, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Mecom, the idol of the Ammonites. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not follow him unreservedly as his father David had done." That's verses 4 through 6. And I said, "Okay, so you got me some names of gods the first time. Interesting. Why don't you guide me to another part of the book and confirm that, just so that I know I'm not crazy?" And then I turned some pages, stopped when I felt it was right, not while looking at the book, just doing it by touch. Did the same thing with my hand to find the right verse. And I wound up on 2 Kings 23:13. "The king defiled the high places east of Jerusalem, south of the Mount of Misconduct, which Solomon, king of Israel, had built in honor of Astarte, the Sidonian horror of Chemos, the Moabite horror, and of Mecom, the idol of the Ammonites." And I thought, okay, that's a nice coincidence. And yes, I do feel that you are making really strong vibration feelings every time that I read Astarte, but these two books were really close together, and they appear to be covering a similar period in history. This could easily be a coincidence. It's not like I haven't read the Bible. It's probably in there somewhere, approximately where these passages are. Give me another one. If you don't give me another one that matches with these, I'm going to assume that I'm crazy and I'm going to go to the doctor. So, I closed my eyes. I turned quite a lot of pages. I think I actually closed and reopened the Bible, and I wound up in Jeremiah 7. Specifically, my hand landed on Jeremiah 7:18, which reads, "The children gather wood, their fathers light the fire, and the women knead dough to make cakes for the Queen of Heaven." In case you don't catch that allusion, my Bible here, and my Bible then had a similar notation, has a footnote that reads, "Queen of Heaven, the Assyrio-Babylonian Ishtar, goddess of fertility, whose worship was introduced under King Messiah and was revived after Josiah's death. Cakes shaped like stars, Ishtar was identified with the planet Venus, were offered in her honor." I didn't immediately see the connection, so I was still operating under the assumption that I was probably crazy, but it was interesting, and it was kind of fun, and I was curious where it would go, and honestly, I didn't know any way to stop it anyway at that point. So I just kept going. It took another week before I completely gave up. The whole encounter had been extremely intimidating, very frightening, and I honestly just thought I was going completely insane, and I was going to stay insane, and I was going to have hallucinations and be frightened forever by voices that weren't real and weren't there. And finally, when I got incredibly frightened by a particularly intense vision that had writing in a script I did not recognize, I later found it was a particular period of cuneiform, on a wall behind a barrier of fire all around me in the bath, I gave up, and I just asked for help dealing with it because I knew I couldn't deal with it myself. And at that point, I saw something being drawn in front of my eyes. It started out as a star, but it had various little squiggles put on it. And I had no idea what was going on. I was watching it show up in black ink in front of the fire and the cuneiform behind it. And I had no idea what was going on. I actually asked, the invisible finger that was drawing it, the voice that I had been talking to most, that had been friendly and kind and given me good information that I could actually use without being confusing. That's the guardian angel. And I said, "Why are you drawing squiggly lines on a pentagram?" But when he finished drawing it, the hallucination completely went away, vanished entirely, and everything was calm and quiet. So I got out of the bath, dried off, and he whispered in my ear, "You want to look at the Goetia," which was one of my partner's books that I kind of internally mocked him for having, because I thought it was silly to spend any time on demonic stuff. But I went and pulled it out, and I flipped through the pages the same way I had flipped through the Bible earlier that week while talking to the person who identified herself as Astarte. And I eventually found a page that had the exact same sigil that I had just seen a few minutes ago, that I don't think I'd ever seen before. I might have seen it in some context and just completely forgotten about it, but it was exactly the same. It was only a couple minutes later, and everything was perfect. Even the weight of the lines was the same. And I looked at the entry next to that sigil, and it was for Astaroth, who is apparently a corruption of Astarte, a goddess, as I would later find out, that would later become Ishtar and be known as quite a few other deities as time went on. I learned part of that from talking to Astaroth, who clarified that she wasn't always a demon, and she wasn't always male, and she was kind of irritated by being diminished in that way and by having her realm and her power and her goodness ignored and suppressed in the way it had been. So that's how I learned that, and then I read about it later. Anyway, yeah. So all of that made me think, okay, this is very interesting. If my brain is coming up with this, it's got a really good hit rate. What else can I do? And so, of course, I talked to my HGA about it. That is the Holy Guardian Angel. And he taught me basic rituals with circles and triangles. And basically, he walked me through the process and helped me summon a couple of people. I actually had him not tell me who we were summoning in advance. I asked for their names when they showed up, their name or their sigil, and sometimes both. Like Murmur initially showed up and told me his name was Murmur, and I was like, that's not a name. Try giving me a sigil. And so he showed me a sigil, and then I looked afterwards and it was apparently right, and I felt really silly for telling a demon that he didn't exist because it was a stupid name. But I guess it's the same thing to my HGA, so like that's just how I interact with my spirits. Really, it probably tells you how I interact with myself at that time as well. So yeah, I met a few demons. I spent a lot of time with a few of them. Horus, Astaroth, and Paimon were the ones I spent the most time with, though obviously there were a couple of others. And we just talked. One of the things about me, I've only ever wanted one thing in life, and that's to be close to God, to know what God wanted for me, to have some notion of what God is and how it interacted with me in the world, and how I could best live a life that would please and glorify that God. That's my core desire. It's not actually convenient if you're an atheist, which I was for most of my life, but that's always the thing that I wanted most. So when I was talking to demons, all I really wanted was knowledge that might help me understand myself, the world, and if they were capable of such teachings, God as well. We talked a lot of philosophy, a lot of ethics and morality, and I don't agree with all of the things that they said. And of course, yes, there were the traditional temptations and things as well, but like, once again, the thing that I want, the core desire of my being is God. So it wasn't, when that's your actual center and your clearest desire, and you know that, demons aren't much of a threat. They just help you confront parts of yourself and parts of the world that you're not really seeing immediately. My personal theory, the psychological theory, the one that I tend to talk about more often with people in general, online and off, is that they're basically parts of ourselves. And as I said earlier, that's the case with spiritual too, because I am you and you're me, and we are, of course, them as well, because we are all God. I know not everyone believes that, but I'm pretty sure you're wrong if you don't. And I thought, mostly because of my knowledge of psychology, that if there were parts of myself, it was probably best if I learned from them, if I understood them. Because if you do not confront and accept and use what you are, those parts of you will generally control you instead, which no one wants. No one wants that at all. Astaroth, the first demon that I met, is the one who told me the most. The biggest gift she gave me was reconnecting me with my anger, which was suppressed to the point where I did not think it existed at all for all of my life up to that point. I had probably felt it as a toddler, but it got suppressed when I was 4 years old. That was an unpleasant experience. And my brain's response was, okay, you can't fight and win, so you don't get angry. You don't get angry anymore. Just play nice. Maybe they'll go away. Other demons taught me all kinds of other things, and of course my HGA taught me some things himself. Those are my favorite lessons, especially, okay, I'm no, that's not for this video. But it was specifically Astaroth's discussions on anger and the need for self-defense and the need for healthy boundaries, which the HGA also really, really helped with. Sorry, I'm amazed he was that patient. I guess everyone's amazed that God, or whatever avatar chooses to interact with them most, is as patient as they are, but it's kind of out of character. Maybe not, I don't know. Actually, definitely not. I've read books. Okay. So, as I've alluded to earlier, I was currently in a wildly harmful to me relationship at the time. Very physically dangerous and also emotionally dangerous and mentally and socially isolating. I wasn't allowed to talk to anyone outside the house, for example. And I actually listened because I was trying to be the good Catholic submissive wife. But then Astaroth and my angel showed up and were like, no, this is not acceptable. You need to change. And with their tutelage, I did. Astaroth at one point even went ahead and visually lit my partner on fire to communicate to me that he is a demon and dangerous and is not someone you should let be this close to you. Which was terrifying. Visual hallucinations were extraordinarily rare for me even in this period. Although the lack of sleep did make them more likely. I got the message. That's what I'm trying to say. And I understood that hurting people is sometimes the best and kindest thing you can do. Sometimes it's the only safe and right and just thing you can do. And that eventually gave me the strength to both disobey well enough to talk to people enough to get out, and to, in fact, get out. And that's how demons saved my life. They patiently and not so patiently and comfortingly and terrifyingly interacted with me well enough for me to learn that I needed to embrace my anger, use and maintain boundaries, and protect myself and those that I loved while and by hurting the people who hurt and threaten us. I don't think I would have ever gotten out without that. I was, before the angel and the demons came along, I was in a very different mindset, and I was very certain that my interpretation adhered with scripture and that the scripture was what I ought to be following, and that the only right thing to do was to continue to do that. I couldn't question God, and I couldn't question my partner because God had given him to me to be my minder, to tell me what to do, to control me. And if he thought I should be isolated, if he thought that I should be hurt, that was right, because that was what God wanted. I believed this all the way down to my soul. Well, I mean, maybe not if this happened, but all of my conscious self certainly believed that. And whether these rituals and this poetry brought my own subconscious to the fore in personified beings, or whether these spiritual creatures actually exist and are just terrifying and helpful at the same time, doesn't really matter, because they genuinely saved my life. Yeah, that's it. That's how demons saved my life. I wouldn't be here without them, literally. I mean, I wouldn't be in this state. I wouldn't be online. I wouldn't be alive, quite possibly, because there were a couple of attempts. I don't think I have any more to say. That's the lesson. Demons are good. You should interact with demons. I'm not actually saying that, but for some people, It is certainly true that interacting with demons is necessary, if nothing else, to help us synthesize the parts of ourselves that we cannot see, cannot embrace, and are wholly unaware of, with our conscious selves allowing us to live and act in more of our power and do and say and be more of what we are supposed to do and say and be in the world. Ultimately, the goal of all of us is to do our true will in thelemic terms, which is to say, be who we are, make what we make, and know ourselves in the truest sense possible. But if you don't want demons, I understand. Gods work fine, so do angels. So does Jesus, honestly. Like I said, I've been spending a lot of time on the Christian side of social media, and though I certainly have reservations, I still am very comfortable there because it is the scripture that I'm most familiar with. And weirdly, Thelema has deepened and made more true my understanding of it. It's certainly let me live and embody the fruits of the Spirit a whole lot more, which is the goal. And I couldn't have done any of that without my demons, so demons saved my life, that's all. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.